Good morning to the US. You're so early. 3 minutes early.
Martin, you're just German cultured.
Yes, of course. Even worse, German army culture.
You might be 5 minutes early. We might be 10 minutes late.
Okay. No, not here. Okay, Michael, did you see in our review of the latest meeting last week, we put you in the center. And last minute, I took out the not the stepper, but your treadmill. It was also mentioned. Anyway,
Did you mention the escapes?
not sure because Khadija has written the article. But I believe it's inside. It was a very insightful. Hello, Rich. Good morning to you. And also,
Hey, Martin.
also Jürgen is here. You have an echo, Rich. Jürgen Brügel is here.
Yeah, okay.
Who is RGM
Nur ganz
personal?
kurz. Nur ganz kurz, du brauchst mir das Transkript nicht mehr schicken. There is a WhatsApp, a PC application where you can do all these fancy things very neatly on your computer.
Oh, so the WhatsApp does transcripts or what?
No, not the WhatsApp does transcripts, but you sent me the BYD transcript, and I asked you to send me this on my email because for some reason I don't get it out of my cell phone.
Okay,
Anyway,
now
the
you have a
message
WhatsApp
is
app. Yes.
there
Okay.
is a fantastic WhatsApp app. You should try it out.
Which we all use since years ago.
For the PC.
Yes, for the PC. I use it
Okay.
daily on a daily basis since maybe
Okay.
2021 or 2020 or so. Yeah. Okay.
Do you know
Let's start.
how I feel now? I have worked for years in my basement and came up with a new invention, a refrigerator.
Nice. Immer dieser Bosch, ne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so it's now 10:01. We are 1 minute late. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Yeah, we have a new thing. I need to share something with you because you all certainly know Chris Hering. He's from China. Actually, he's a German working in China and he's not here today. But I had the honor and the joy of giving a pre-lecture of our 4x4 lecture series at the Technical University of Munich in the Asia campus. So I tried to squeeze our 40 lectures into a 20-minute presentation and just the gist. And what I did is I presented, just to give you a short overview, I presented the S-curve. Credit goes to Michael Ostrowski. I presented the Ansoff matrix. Credit goes to Rich McDonald, who is here. And also I presented the blue ocean strategy. And I presented the exploit continuum with a fuzzy front end definition. And I explained a bit what is non-incremental innovation, using all this with an example, which is yeah, you know, probably already. It's about the garden swing that was to improve, and then it goes through several stages. And I explained on how you can iteratively, using my 4x4 innovation matrix, which is a stage gate or a phase gate approach to manage the 4 elements of innovation, which is R&D, freedom to operate, intellectual property protection, and market response testing. So, and I used that to explain, and also gave in a few sidelines remarks of what we have talked about for the past 4 years here and discussed. And I got very amazing, I mean, mind-boggling responses. For example, also, when I give you a concrete example, I told people, I told the students or the audience how it is to do non-incremental innovation. And for me, non-incremental innovation happens when you switch from one S-curve in your company to another one. And the MBA solution is that this is a linear approach. But in practice, this is never linear, but it's more like fuzzy front end before you reach a new product. So actually, for the follow-up product, the S-curve is only halfway valid, because the first part of the S-curve is an iterative chaos, where at one point in time a miracle happens, and that miracle would then lead to a product. And for that miracle to happen, you need a few components, among others, a serial innovator, which is a person that has special personality traits. And but the outstanding thing was that people wanted to know what are the personality traits of a serial innovator. And so I described a bit what is a serial innovator, Bruce Wojcik's book, and then and a bit more. And I also developed a test, like I used my clinical psychology insights from studying that to develop a test, a 10-stage test, and then the people got interested. Well, can we have that test? Can we take part? So I showed them where they can sign up on my website, and a few of them did already. And also I heard stories like they had a serial innovator in their company of 500, and then the company, this serial innovator left, or they just put too much bureaucracy on it, and also a successor who was an MBA, and that successor was not successful at all. And then that killed the innovation, the non-incremental innovation, and even part of the incremental innovation in that company. And then I explained to them that if you have a real non-incremental innovation in your company, then the incumbents means those people that are on the current S-curve and keeping it alive by doing incremental innovation would be the enemies and the foes. And then another participant says, oh, I have seen this for 10 years. We had hired someone for non-incremental shift, and then he really got problems with the incumbents, the existing people who run the current S-curve. And so we discussed for 1 hour all these things, what we did for the past 4 years. And then I found it so, how to say, surprising. Having my background, I'm not an innovation expert. I'm a patent attorney by training and an engineer and inventor. And I only stumbled into this during COVID-19 because I thought I need to change something. So that was my amazing experience this week in the area of innovation. And I just throw it at you, to the lions, that you can contribute or can question, or maybe you had similar experiences when you talk. But I let you talk now. Please unmute your microphone and talk at will.
So, hey, Martin, maybe you could describe for us who was in the audience and how many people were there, and
Okay, so the audience was this was a mentor-mentee course of the German Chamber of Commerce, Foreign Chamber of Commerce in Greater China. And they have about 10 different places where they do business. And they organized something for a period of 6 months, I believe, with recurring events. And they met and then discussed innovation. And they had some lecturers there. Actually, one got really angry with me because I made some provocative statements, it seems to me, because, for example, I said, only 40% of all people are creative. I have a minimum degree of the creativity. And she said that what I say about the blue ocean strategy, that it doesn't apply to the non-incremental innovation, is not right. It should only be applied to incremental innovation. And I said, no, cannot be. It's a very useful tool if you know how to use it for non-incremental innovation. So these were about, 30 students, and they were interested in innovation, and they came from all sorts of the industry. They were somehow interested because it sounds interesting. Innovation is always good, and then you get a more or less cheap course from the German Chamber of Commerce in China, and is all online. So does this answer your question, Rich, or do you want to know, have you more specific questions?
That answered that question, but my next follow-up question to that is now that I understand the audience, my follow-up question is really sort of related to, you put a lot of data in front of them, right? And
yes.
I'm assuming that you used some slides to do that.
Yes.
And, to throw that much at people in a very holistic way, like you did, is that, much, right? So I'm wondering about, how did they see any linkages between what you told them and, how to use those tools, and what their interest was in, the tools individually, right?
I did, because I showed them a development of a product, and how to use the tools to find your own position, where you are in the big picture. And I showed them the stages of the development of a product, from idea to conceptual model to prototype and to product version 1.0. And I took a very simple product that everyone can understand, and I showed them the initial steps, and how you find out whether the market response tells you to pivot, to stop, or to change the direction slightly. And yeah, so I used an imaginary product, and I asked them whether they understood, and yes, they understood. And for the first time, did they hear that they should have a phase gate? and because most of them do the R&D, and only once the product is ready would they enter the market.
Sure. So
yes.
So what was the final, I'm going to call it the final outcome of the meeting? Did they want to know more? Or did they, what was their expressed, level of interest at the conclusion of your talk?
So they all expressed interest on the TUM Asia lecture, because I have the 2 links where you can register yourself. So I showed the 2 links, and I told them that what I just laid before them, and I gave a lot of examples, right? Like the incumbent, the new versus the now versus the new, and then I gave example on serial innovators. I told them the old thing. A company of 1 has a serial innovator. A company of 10 has 1 serial innovator. A company of 100 has 1, maybe 2 serial innovators. A company of 1,000 has 1 or 2 serial innovators. A company of 10,000 has 0 serial innovators. And that's very provocative, because these people think that you can innovate in a committee. This is what they were taught in the course. And that's simply, it doesn't happen in practice. And so what I did is I generated, appetite for learning more. And the organizers were very supportive. They said, okay, for a several weeks long course is only $1,500. And so almost all of them registered. They didn't pay yet, but I'm quite sure that a lot of them will attend. And I also found out more about the little giants, hidden champions.
Yeah. So
what I found out, you wouldn't believe, Rich.
Well, I want to know that. So
Okay.
That's critical information for me right now. So
yeah, you know what I found out? In China, it seems to be that there is a layer of entrepreneurs flying under the radar.
correct. Yep.
And the Socialist Party is not interested. And once they hit a certain threshold, suddenly the Socialist Party gets a say. I put it very polite, and that's when the serial innovators or the entrepreneurs get frustrated. And there are several examples of entrepreneurs who set up a company overseas because they cannot stand the bureaucracy and that those government people get the say in their company. And it seems to me that the threshold is quite high, some 500 employees, I think.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but nothing came up about, or did anything? Was there any mention of anything related to industries, specific industries those companies were in?
No. But
okay.
What I found out is that not only German companies there, but Chinese.
Yeah.
I would say half of them. Chinese companies sitting in a course organized by a German Chamber of Commerce in China about innovation.
Sure.
And in total there are 30, and I believe that is a huge market for and the 500 company, a 500 people company is equivalent to I would say the average German SME, small and medium sized company.
Right.
I mean, there are SMEs with 2,000, 3,000 people or 4,000. Yes. But there are also SMEs with 10 or 20 or so people. So 500.
Right.
And that's quite a decent threshold for.
So for the audience here, just let me elaborate a little bit on the little giants. As I was doing some research and on a totally different topic, and you know how you sort of go off on a tangent and down a rabbit hole on something. Something caught my attention in this one document that I was reading, and it mentioned this investment that China was making in these smaller organizations beyond just the large the BYDs of the world, right? And how those companies were going to be critical to their infrastructure. And as I dug into that, I discovered this corporate initiative, or this China governmental initiative that basically identifies and funds specific technical product and service kinds of companies that they term as a little giant. And what they want to do is that there's now 10,400 companies that they've identified that China is pumping money into, and they are to grow and grow to serve the Chinese manufacturing sector, if you would, and product development and other capabilities, right? That they would need, not only from products, but technology and so on and so forth. And China is funding these companies to grow at astronomical growth rates, right? And to acquire technology and bring that in. So it's now domestic technology that the Chinese companies are using versus imported technology from Germany, from US or Japan or Korea or wherever, so that they can become, self-sufficient as opposed to relying on critical technologies from foreign companies. And so this initiative is now called the Little Giants. It's been around evidently for a dozen years or so.
Okay.
And it was the first time that I had ever heard anything about it. And it's their focus on building it. The way that I've interpreted everything I've been able to find on it so far, I interpreted China's initiative, basically to build a Mittelstand group of companies, and those companies are, to go global as well, and to dominate their specific, industry space. And that's the intention of the government sponsorship of these companies. And the government is identifying these companies, bringing them into this Little Giants program, and if they miss their numbers, so to speak, they're out and they plug another company in, right? So they're aggressive about the management of this and growing that, but it's really a critical threat, I think, to SMEs around the world.
Yeah. And especially if you know how this works. Because we had a discussion offline, right? Bruce was there and he was wondering, was very smart remark. He would like to know how that works if it's coming top down and not bottom up, as in a free market space.
Yeah, so I've written 2 papers that are on my LinkedIn profile that you can find at your leisure. And the second one, part 2, as I called it, about Little Giants, answers Bruce's question. And
okay.
It's pretty long-winded, so get prepared to read a lot. But there's a lot of information in there. And
would you mind sharing it in the 4x4 group in LinkedIn?
Yeah, I can do that. Sure.
That would be cool. And then also give me some hint or so, then I will comment on that, because I must be I'm very honest. I have so much on my plate. I don't do much on LinkedIn recently, so I publish more than I read.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do that right after the meeting today. And so
yes, thank you. So can you just summarize what your findings are? So does this, what's your take on that? Because we know, right, in a socialist country, everything is by planned economics. And the question is, how far does the everything go? If it is in Russia during the communism, you were even not allowed to have a hammer, because a hammer is a production means. And production means were owned by the society, or the community. That's why they're called communists. And in the German Democratic Republic, you were allowed to have a hammer, and you could do certain things up to a certain size, because the bureaucrats were not able to interfere with very little, even the smallest initiatives, while Russia was. And also the fear factor plays a certain role, which was, of course, in Russia a bigger threat than in the German Democratic Republic, which is East Germany, by the way. And in China, it seems to me that if you can run a company with 500 without having interference by the government. While if you take a larger view, for example, Jürgen, you have sent me this interview or this analysis where the BYD company, the electric car company, was taken under scrutiny by the Chinese government, and they forced them to pay their for months unpaid suppliers in one go, bringing the BYD company into cash flow difficulties. And if that happens, if a government official tells you to pay your suppliers with whom you have a certain payment arrangement, I believe that's something that goes beyond the imaginable, even in a socialist country like Germany today. But for China, that seems to be normal. But that does not happen if your company is only 500 people large. So what's your insight, Rich? What did you find out? Is it a top-down or is it a bottom-up approach? Or did you also find a threshold in your evaluation?
So it's very, from a strategic agenda standpoint, it's top-down. From a tactical execution standpoint, it's bottom-up. And meaning that the company is, from a bottom-up perspective, meaning the company must execute to the stated goals, right, and objectives that the government has outlined in the top-down approach. So if we take a step back just for a minute, and I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing to everybody here, but just to give you some thought about the framework of this thing, this initiative that they have, and this is just my opinion, and just
yeah, relax, Rich. We will not grill you for that. Sorry, this is a fun group here, and we are allowed to ventilate opinions here. No problem.
Yeah. So my opinion is what the government is doing is saying, we've identified these structural industries that we want to participate in, electric cars and solar and blah blah blah, right? And then they've come to the point where they've said all of these industries, we can fund and we can spin up these businesses, like a BYD, and make them, leaders by then changing the internal politics of the government to reflect consumption of those products and technologies, and drive volume, and then take the volume that is in excess and build systems that would make the products gain excessive volumes, and we can ship that overseas to other markets and dump that onto markets, right? So that's what China's been doing years.
In other words, you mean you see your transfer innovation happening in China with now suddenly using the knowledge that they gained from other large industry, for example, the smartphone industry, now applying to other industries.
Exactly. Then what they've done is they've said, but wait a minute, there are key technologies that are underpinning these core industries that we've identified that we need to have control over, that we don't have control, because we have to buy those products and technologies from foreign companies, whether that be Germany, whether that be US, or some other country outside of China. So what they've done is they've said, what are those core technologies? And, they've come up with a list, and I'm trying to get that list, and so that's a whole different story. But they've come up with some kind of a list of those key technologies that are underlying all of these industries that, require that. And then they've said, we are going to fund companies that are Chinese companies, and that's a little giant. And those companies are going to be tasked with basically building their company at hyper growth speed to become dominant, not only dominant suppliers to our infrastructure inside China, but also then take that technology and compete on a global basis and become global leaders at some point in time, right? And again, based on my analysis, I'm thinking that they're about 12 years into this program, maybe 14 at the most, and they're basically saying to these companies, you know, if you aren't growing at 12% per annum per year in real growth, then you have the potential of being knocked off this little giants list. Currently, there's about 10,400 companies on that list, is the last number that I've been able to find, and people have told me about. That being said, you know, there's a number of these core areas of technology, and, you know, give you an example, you know, motion control, right, for production processes, dispensing, and basically that dispensing could be, you know, controlling any kinds of liquid or viscous fluids, right, for different applications, you know, in semiconductor to medical device to medical instrumentation, so on and so forth. And motion control, you know, used across a plethora of industries, right, and from a manufacturing standpoint. And then, you know, other types of devices, you know, whether that be electrical actuation, you know, under that, robotics would be part of that. You know, end of arm tooling as part of robotics would be part of that. So all those underlying technologies, you know, they've identified companies within each of these verticals, and they've appointed them to be and brought them into this Little Giants initiative. And then basically to provide funding so that those companies can build up their R&D and, you know, bring in different types of technologies that they can then, you know, create as their own to service their own industrial base, but then spin that out with excess volume across the world to compete. So the final brush of this is that, and the final look at this in a very, you know, large, you know, macro view, in my opinion, is that, you know, companies that are SMEs that are technical in nature, you know, they've got this threat that's coming down the highway, right? And, you know, either be, you know, from a competitive threat, certainly, but certainly from a market access, you know, standpoint, you know, the Chinese companies are going to be, you know, in the marketplace with the latest and greatest technology at a, you know, very low price point, because, you know, that's what they've learned and that works, right?
Yes.
And they've seen the Japanese do that. So they've, you know, the Chinese are taking this approach, again, in my opinion, that is, you know, very much the way Japan entered the market in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they've combined that with the middle stand, you know, kind of, you know, hidden champions, if you would, to grow those companies. But, you know, the government is behind that growth and propelling that growth, right? And, you know, making them, you know, key suppliers to these infrastructure industries.
Yes. And not only that, there is an additional element, and I'm referring to the book. Wait, let me look it up. There is this Rich McGee who wrote this book about Apple and how Apple became dependent on China, but not only that, China became what is today because of Apple. and I believe that the Apple concept of making things on a large scale, on mobile phones on a large scale, or smartphones on a large scale, has been, how to say, assimilated by China and applied to other industries. And now, as they have successfully applied that to cars and a few other industries, using the same approach of scaling individual success in certain niche areas, but by 14,000 companies, and I mean, even if 90% of them do not succeed, you still have 1,400 who succeed, and massively, and they would be world market leaders. And I don't know how many you know that better because you gave me that book, Rich. How many hidden champions are there in Germany, more or less?
At one time there was like 3,000.
Okay. 3,000. Okay. Yeah. So if you take Pareto 2080, of the 14,000, 20% would do 80% of the success. That's 2,800.
Mm-hmm.
So within no time, a once third world country starts to compete with number 3 on the world rank list. And I don't know how many SMEs there are in the US, but I would assume not so many, because the US has a very different structure when it comes to industrialization on product. I believe there's no this SME like in Germany, where the founder would still run or the family would run it for 3 generations. I believe is less common in the US than in Germany.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, but China artificially. Well, wait. I should be more respectful. China, by applying systematic knowledge about how to make a niche industry big worldwide, to a large number of various niche technologies, would from 0 to 100 become the size of Germany in that SME area.
Yeah, exactly. And, so the SMEs in Germany and, or other parts of the world, whether that be US, Germany, and France,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. I mean, I see this as a major threat, to those companies, because they're not going to have the opportunity to, leverage, governmental funds for,
Yes.
building R&D and their product and technology portfolios. So, they're going to be under a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah, sure. If you don't innovate.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Exactly. If you sit on your S curve and hope that for the next like the turkey, right?
Yeah.
Like the turkey until the day before Thanksgiving feels very happy.
Yeah, I mean this little champions, or excuse me, a little giants, strategy that they have is just sort of mind blowing. For them to recognize that they need to, create this their own internal ecosystem of suppliers is amazing.
But shouldn't that be the reason? Because you mentioned this old book from the 1990s. This was outside of the discussion here. The Cohen and Levinthal coined the term absorptive capacity.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you please explain that? Because it seems to me that you know a lot about that, and maybe you apply that to the China Apple example, and also to what happens in China right now. And wouldn't that be something that for example, German companies could try to learn, that they improve the absorptive capacity for innovation?
Sure. So absorptive capacity refers to the idea, the concept is wrapped around the idea of a company that has the ability to absorb and utilize and then commercialize a technology, a product, a system, a process, anything within the acquisition of another firm. And typically when you're dealing with M&A, and which is mergers and acquisitions, one of the things that is not written about a lot, but is very key is what are we going to do with this company, right? That's written a lot about. But what's not written about is how to absorb that knowledge internally and from that company and how to leverage that, right? It's just sort of assumed that that's going to happen. And some companies do it very efficiently and they know how to do that. And then other companies fall flat on their face. And that's the reason for, 75, 80, 90% of acquisitions failing is because the lack of absorptive capacity. And basically that's sort of like a dimension, if you would, that AC is, I'll call it for now. It's sort of a dimensionless number, if you would, from the standpoint that it's really should be thought of as, it's an internal skill set of being able to recognize a key underlying technology or a product or system or a process that another firm has, and be able to bring that in and then leverage that within the corporation to build out capabilities and more assets and skill sets, if you would. And so that's sort of the concept behind, in simple words, behind absorptive capacity. Applying that to Apple, as you mentioned, Martin, when you think about that and you think about what Apple did with China, and this goes way back to the very beginning when China decided to make the iPhones in China. They came to the Chinese government, and they came to the Chinese, political arm and manufacturing, and said, we want to bring manufacturing of these phones to, the mainland for, distribution around the globe. And they had to train and bring engineers into China to basically train the Chinese on how to manufacture the product, right? And what that would look like. And as they trained them and upped their skills and their knowledge, China's absorptive capacity for manufacturing of high-tech products increased, right? Because now they're being exposed to an entirely different layer of know-how that they hadn't had access to before, right? So they're being trained by Apple. And if you extrapolate that and then start to look at the decades that Apple's been teaching and training them, their absorptive capacity for recognizing new technologies that they need becomes heightened, right? They can more easily identify trends. They can more easily identify the direction of technologies that they need and want, for the future. And because of that, they now recognize that we really need to understand fluid mechanics as applied to this particular area and process. We need to understand electric motors as applied to vehicles. We need to understand, solar and, basically, the whole mechanism of inverters related to solar power And,
I believe batteries was one of their other strategic ones.
Yeah, exactly. So great point, Joe. And, so that absorptive capacity now starts to expand as across the country, because now they're training other engineers. Now think back to where a lot of the engineering talent is coming from China. Well, it's coming from Chinese that are sent over to the US and the UK and other parts of the world for education, and then they're brought back home, right? So now that starts to add to that absorptive capacity of the country. And it just is a flywheel effect, right? It just spins and spins and spins and gains momentum and inertia. And as you take a look at that absorptive capacity, now China is basically a rival to Germany, a rival to the U.S. and their knowledge. Where they are struggling still is in creativity, right? They're
and
very
Japan, Rich, Japan.
Yeah, and
so the four biggest economies in this world is the US. Just for the audience, US is the biggest or second biggest, I believe, bigger still than China, followed by Germany and Japan. And they all, Germany, Japan, and the US had success because there was an uncoordinated way to support founders in creating smart products that gain world dominance. While China now learned by working for Apple, at least this is what the Patrick McGee says in his book, Apple in China, the captors of the world's greatest company. And now they not only learned how to work in the company, but also how to work successfully on the company by generating companies that have a world dominance in a niche area.
Yeah. So, all that training and all of that, education, is coming back to enable them to, compete at a much higher level across, all these various industries, right? And it's now, homegrown talent as opposed to just, what a foreign company will teach us. And if you look at the contracts between, as an example, an American company that wants to put a manufacturing base into China, some years ago, when you wanted to open a plant there, you had to, make the Chinese government a partner in the company, right? And they had access to all of your knowledge that you're bringing into the country to make product. And, you had to train those people, the workers in that plant, just like you would train anywhere else. So there's a lot of knowledge that leaks out, if you would, right? And that adds even further to that absorptive capacity. And so that's how, to sort of think about absorptive capacity in a very broad way, right? And applying that to an M&A situation, a company that, is in a particular industry, seeks and identifies a target company and, for acquisition, and they acquire that company. Well, they acquire that company for, gaining market access, gaining customer access, and or both, or maybe it's a technology buy, or maybe it's just to limit competition, to buy a company and basically, kill it and, just take the products and, milk them, for a period of time. So those are all common strategies in M&A. And, basically when a company is acquiring another, that absorptive capacity, if it's a technology buy, it really depends on the readiness level of the acquirer, what level they're at as far as absorptive capacity. Can they assimilate all of that data that that new company is bringing to them and leverage that in future products and solutions, you know, going into their marketplace and or into new markets that they want to enter. So that's absorptive capacity in M&A.
Yeah, and wait, am I unmuted? Yeah, I'm unmuted. And I see so many. So once you look at it from a strategic point of view, then you would see many patterns. But what I can tell you from the event this week, the small and medium-sized companies still fight with the same difficulties as the small and medium-sized enterprises anywhere else. Like there was this one example where they just put up so much bureaucracy that their serial innovator left. And that also reminds me and I told that example, and this is why they liked it so much, right? Because I've in the course of my AI trainings for patent attorneys, I encountered a company which is a hidden champion, but not globally, but more within Europe. I cannot say the vertical where they work, because if I say that one, then you would immediately know how to find out who it is. So I need to be a bit confidential here, because as a patent attorney, I shouldn't reveal the identity of him. But this company had one serial innovator, and this serial and the products are relatively easy. It's for is B2B and is about in investment goods. And they only had one innovator in an R&D department of 100. And this one R&D, in this one serial innovator, was responsible for 99% of all the products of the past 20 years. And the company was then in the third generation. I mean, the first generation was the founder, and he brought up a certain product range. The product range was further developed by one of the leading engineers, and then there was a junior technician, and he became the serial innovators in the second generation. And now the second generation left the company, and the third generation immediately hired some consultants from one of the big consulting companies like Bain and I don't know what, Accenture and others. And the two junior consultants from that consulting company, they installed the MBA process for innovating. And the serial innovator, that happened in Germany, got so frustrated that in a week before Christmas, he just left the company without giving notice. He just didn't come back. and since then, the whole R&D department was clueless of what to do. And then they played the ball over to the patent department that they had, is with 3 engineers and 1 patent attorney. And the company leadership expected now the patent department to provide the innovation. So in their desperate situation, they approached us, I mean me and the firm. Hey, you do AI? Can you use AI for providing innovation, growth? And I showed them a bit what is possible, and they immediately found out that AI can do a lot, but not non-incremental innovation. And that's how I heard. And then I asked a bit how that happened, and then they told me the story. And when I told the story in the course on Tuesday, it resonated with one of the participants, because she said that she had the same thing, and then she asked, how do we find the right serial innovator? And then I told them about how to find a serial innovator. I mean, what you need is quite straightforward, but the question is, would you still find a serial innovator? Maybe there is none. and then she said, should we go back and get this serial innovator back? And then I said, maybe. Have you ever heard of Apple and Steve Jobs? What happened to him? Because I believe he was the serial innovator when he was laid off because he was so abrasive with his peers or whatever, or the management, that the Apple company couldn't no longer stand it. But I'm not really informed because I was very young when that happened. I believe I was maybe 18 or 19. So China has the same problems as the other companies. Just the fact that the government does this initiative and pours money into certain companies, I don't think that this will give them a per se advantage over other countries that don't have this socialist subsidy game.
Well, I'm tending to disagree with you, Martin. As a matter of fact, I very intensely listened to what Rich said. That was a very, very, very nice summary of what's going on. And it was also very interesting to learn about this absorptive capacity. And I would like to ask one question. Does China even need absorptive capacity any longer? In earlier talks, I told you about my experiences or my observations. 20 years ago or something like that, China was totally dependent on the research, on papers created by foreign groups. Then there was a shift. You got more and more authors on scientific and technological publications where the co-authors were Chinese researchers. And for a couple of years, I've noticed that when breaking through, messages come through the numerous feeds, it's exclusively Chinese research groups which present them. So they have their own R&D systems set up so efficiently that they create innovation, or at least the part of innovation which comes down to research and development. So I'm almost tempted to say they don't need much absorptive capacity because they create most of the things which they need for themselves and are technology leaders in many fields right at the moment. And Martin, when you said, yeah, socialist government, I mean, they are pretty effective in doing what they are doing. It's not like following some Marxist guidelines which were drafted 100 years ago. What they do is, as a matter of fact, pretty efficient, I think. Learning about these little giants, it seems to me as if initially they wait until some company pops up and exceeds the critical threshold of size. Then it becomes visible to the government, and then it gets funded and supported. And apparently this seems to be a very, very efficient way of creating those little giants. So
sounds like that, Roland. Sounds like that.
Okay. I've heard critical voices too. I once read an article which said, without quoting the references, that among 150 car makers, which by now exist in China, maybe 3 or 4 are really self-sufficient and profitable. The other ones still depend on subsidies. But you still have a system over there where you apparently can afford giving subsidies to not yet efficient enough companies. And this is one big advantage of China. They determine their rules of economy as they please. And until now, they have been pretty efficient in doing so, because we really now start feeling the Chinese cars arriving in Germany. So
okay. I have only one argument.
Okay.
Did you know that a Nobel Prize, I wouldn't say winner, but because Nobel Prizes are awarded, right? A Nobel Prize owner in national economics in the US in 1990 or 1989 has written in a book that the Russian system is proof for socialism be a viable basis for an economical system. And he got the Nobel Prize for that in 1989 or 1990.
Okay, and your point being what?
1991, the Soviet Union went bankrupt.
Okay, we can elaborate on that, but coming back to China, which has been the major topic of today's talk, I'd say right at the moment they're doing quite well. They have research capacity and breakthrough innovations. They have, due to the friendship with Russia, virtually unlimited access to raw materials which they need. And they have a market where they can try out lots of things, where they have large population which buys, and they need only low profit margins to make a product viable. We are not in that great situation, because if our profit margins are not high enough, we fail. It's a difference if you have 400 million Europeans or 400 or 360 million Americans as compared to 1,400 million Chinese who buy products. So all the economic indicators which I can analyze point to a very favorable situation for China. But maybe we can discuss later on or next week.
Next week, maybe.
Next week, yeah. That was a highly interesting speech today. Thanks a lot, Martin and Rich. You gave great insights.
Yeah, I would like in the stock market, just because a stock has raised for such a long time, it doesn't mean that it will not collapse tomorrow. That's what I can tell you, and I've seen it often. And and also again, maybe I find this Nobel Prize winner and with his prognosis for Russia. What I can tell you is that socialism never works out. It has never and will never.
Yeah, but you have to ask yourself the question: is it really still socialism what China is doing?
No, it's not. It's not at all. I mean, there's a huge fundamental difference between what China's doing, you know, within the confines of political definitions. I mean, it's a hybrid kind of an approach of capitalism and communism, and
I will see more. So my plan is to move to China for a year at least and run the same thing from China. But we will see where that goes. Hey, we have reached the end of our hour. See you next week. Thank you all. That was really interesting. And thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.